Dear audience, I guess I speak for the three of us when I say that I'm quite honored to speak to you here about the notion of open educational resources. We are doing a dance for the three gentlemen, and I use the word dance for those people who have seen Terry Anderson's presentation yesterday about the dance between pedagogy and resources. My task will be to be a kind of preface to the talks of both Terry and Andy. Terry Anderson will talk about the actual context of use of open educational resources, whereas Andy will focus on the research aspects of it. Okay. The preface starts with a bit of a personal history. And then I'll discuss with you 4 varieties of being open, 2 of which are very relevant to what we're doing today. And finally, if time allows it, I will very briefly talk about the research project and the research group at the Open University of the Netherlands that I'm heading, and the kind of research that we're doing then on learning networks, in which open educational resources play a key role. The history bit. When I was in my teens, I read a book by Isaac Asimov, the Foundation trilogy. I don't know whether any one of you has read that. It made a very big impression on me. At the time, I read a lot of science fiction. The book is about a psychohistorian, a non-existent brand of scientist who lives in the year 12,000. I think if Asimov had written it now, he would have probably said it in 3000, given the pace at which technology develops. Anyway, the book is about the science of psychohistory that captures societal developments in statistical laws. So the idea is that societies develop along a preset path, ultimately ending in their devastation. And people in 12,000 saw this coming and seeded 2 civilizations at the far ends of the galaxy in an attempt to make sure that civilization would survive. When I read the book, I was both impressed and I had my doubts about it. And the doubt was whether you could actually have these kinds of statistical laws. Now, being in my teens, I don't recall how old I exactly was, but I didn't have a very articulated idea of what the problem here was. But what stuck with me that it didn't feel good. About 15 years later, I read another book. I mean, I read some in between, but I read The Poverty of Historicism by Sir Karl Popper, which was published in 1957, and which is a sort of condensed version of his 1945, The Open Society and Its Enemies. And Popper said, there are no general laws of historical development at the system level, at the level of a society. There are laws at the level of the interactions between people, and those are laws of psychology. But there is no sort of set pathway at the level of societies, and a fortiori at the level of galaxies, which was Asimov was talking about. And I instantly remembered that, and I realized then that was, it took Karl Popper to tell me what was wrong in the ideas of Asimov. Popper's books, I should say, were of course written in a reaction also to the atrocities of the Second World War, and also to what had happened and still was happening at the time in Russia, to totalitarian regimes who had a vision of completely designing society, much in the way that Asimov certainly didn't mean a vision like that, but it is the kind of vision that underlies it. And Popper's response was that we need an open society. And in the open society, we should have rules that minimize the risks of bad rulers. Not rules that, by which you can design a society and make sure that it goes off in the right path, but rules that make sure that it doesn't go in the wrong direction. For Popper, an open society is therefore an end in itself. It's the kind of society that we want. And in doing so, it takes the interests of the participants, the inhabitants, the people at heart. This is very much a moral stance. Openness in society, for Popper, also is a means to an end. It's through openness that we make sure that societies don't go off in the wrong direction. And, of course, you need to make sure that while being open, you're able to change things. And this is when he introduces the notion of tinkering, piecemeal change, small changes. And this is something, actually, which I believe applies to larger systems of people anyway. If you want to change something, do it piecemeal, because otherwise you don't have enough control. Now, the idea of openness, as used by Popper, I feel has much wider ramifications than only in terms of his political philosophy. Or maybe I should say there is a variety of instances of this notion of openness that are applicable today, and maybe there are instances of his political philosophy. These are the open movements. And the oldest one, this is what you get if you transfer a keynote presentation for Mac to a PowerPoint. The Y drops off. The first example of a first instance of the open movement is about open interoperability standards. Now, this movement predates the books that Popper wrote. The first instance of an open standards body was founded in 1901, the British Standard Institution, it was called, followed in the 1915 and 1916 by the American Standards body and the Dutch one and the German one, and I didn't look at the others, but they're, I think roughly at that time they were founded. Followed by ISO in 1947 only. Open standards, open interoperability standards are there to make sure that appliances can, interoperate, can work together. And the figure here of the plugs show you how difficult that sometimes can be. And in this day and age, where we have computers which are networked and so on, the sheer size of the problem has multiplied several times. However, I don't want to go into the notion of interoperability standards too much. What I do want to say is that in this movement also there are these elements of morals and pragmatics recognizable. The moral part is that by having open interoperability standards, you create a level playing field for vendors. If you are a producer of nuts and bolts and you agree on the kind of threading and so on, how you do that, then of course more people can produce nuts and bolts that can be applied in different pieces of equipment. You make sure that monopolies do not survive. And that this is something, of course, which is in the computer age also very important. At the same time, and this is the pragmatic point, it provides economic benefits for us consumers, because now we have more competition, and through that we get better prices. Also, we don't get a vendor lock-in, which means that the investments that we have done in buying particular pieces of equipment do not go down the drain if this particular provider or this particular company goes bankrupt. That was open interoperability standards. Open source code is another example, much more recent. And here too you find these two elements. Richard Stallman founded the Free Software Foundation in the 60s, and he felt very strongly that software code was a public good. It had to be given back to the public. Now, of course, he was working for MIT, and when he formulated this idea, it was sort of obvious that software code was openly shared by people. But with the arrival of vendors of printers, also came printer drivers for different computers, and the software code for the printer drivers was definitely not open, which got him into trouble when a printer didn't work, and that's when he realized software code should be open.